My grandmother taught me a number of lessons about God when I was growing up. She was a very spiritual person, and she played an important role in the formation of my faith. She would often call to see how we were doing and would always want to pray with us, no matter what the need was. One of the things that I clearly remember her teaching us was that everything we have comes from God, and we must be generous with the gifts that we receive and return to God what is His. Now, when you are a teenager or a young adult, it is not always easy to recognize the gifts we have been given. But as I grew older, I began to understand what she meant. I felt a call to service from a young age and developed a strong foundation in the church. My dad was the first lay minister on the altar at our church. My mom sang in the choir, and I was an altar server. At the age of 16, the Monsignor acknowledged my faith and service and made me a Eucharistic minister. At the time, the Archdiocese of Los Angeles required you to be 21 years old to serve as a Eucharistic minister, so that was a special privilege for me. Our family met at my grandmother's house every month to pray and have dinner together. It was a time for us to gather as a family, to pray, and to enjoy each other's company. She was a faith-filled person who prayed constantly, called often, and taught us a number of important lessons about God. And she was not afraid to share some advice with us. The example that my family set for me provided a foundation for my spiritual life, as well as an example of stewardship for the many gifts that I had been given. While we may not have used the term stewardship, I knew that God had plans for my life. I carried these examples into my adult life and have continually felt the call to service in a number of different ways, including my involvement in a number of ministries here in our faith community. I have been involved with a number of activities in the 10 years that my family has been a part of the St. Catherine's community, including the youth mission trip, teaching confirmation, leading Lenten groups, and my involvement in the parish reopening committee. My involvement in these and other ministries has allowed me to share my gifts with our community, as well as those beyond our community. When we hear the word stewardship, it can often be thought of as giving of money or our treasure. When the Stewardship Renewal rolls around, it usually is thought that we are going to be asked to give more. While we are called to give generously of the treasures that we are blessed with, stewardship is more than just sharing our monetary gifts. Stewardship is a recognition that everything we have is a gift that has been entrusted to us from God. And we are called to be stewards of these gifts by sharing them in love of God and neighbor. It is seen as giving of our gifts of time, of talent, and of our treasure. As stewards of Christ, we are called to serve others and to give of the many gifts that God has given us. In 1 Peter chapter 4, we read, "As each one has received a special gift, employ it in serving one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God." God provides us with these gifts, and if we believe that everything that we have comes from Him, we are not giving our gifts to God, but returning to Him what He has given to us. Giving of ourselves to others can sometimes require a sacrifice on our part, but if giving is done joyfully, there is so much that can be received in return. Today, I would like to share a story of an experience I had a few years ago that exemplifies these words. In reflecting on this talk, I was reminded of an experience that I had a few summers ago when I was attending a course at UCLA in Los Angeles. I work as a research scientist, and as a part of my continuing education, I was attending a course in immunology, which was being offered on the UCLA campus. The university has a conference center with meeting rooms and a hotel, but I was late in signing up and all the rooms were full. I was able to find a hotel just off campus that had a room available, which was just a short walk to campus. I felt like a student again, at least for a few days. In the morning, I would get dressed, put my backpack on, and go to school. If you are not familiar with this part of Los Angeles, the UCLA campus is located in a very upscale area, neighboring some very exclusive cities, including Bel Air and Beverly Hills. The hotel that I was staying at was on the edge of West Beverly Hills. Across from the campus is the Westwood Village, which is full of shopping and restaurants and is quite popular with students. The beautiful campus and the expensive cars driving by gave the feeling of being in a special place. The irony was that in the midst of this beautiful environment and all the perceived wealth, there were people who I assumed were homeless that I would see sleeping on the grass right in front of the sign at the entrance of the university. It was kind of striking to see the Ronald Reagan Hospital in the background with all the busyness of the students and the hospital employees walking by. And there were these people who made this area into what looked like their home. They didn't bother anyone, but seemed to be part of the landscape and were invisible to those walking by. For several days, I saw the same people sleeping there in the morning as I walked onto campus, and in the evening as I walked back to the hotel. One evening, I decided to get some dinner across the street in the Westwood Village area. As I was walking back towards the hotel, I intentionally stayed on the opposite side of the street because I did not want to pass the homeless people. This particular night, I noticed there was just one man there, the same man that I had seen there each day. I tried to ignore the man as I walked along, but something inside me was telling me to turn around and go talk to the man. I continued walking and tried to ignore that voice, but I couldn't. And I turned and I crossed the street. I approached the man and asked him if he needed anything to eat. To my surprise, he seemed very content and said that he had eaten and that he was okay. I handed him some money and told him that it was for him to get something to eat the next day. He thanked me and I went on my way. As I walked back to the hotel, I asked myself why I had not given more. I had plenty of money in my wallet, and my company was paying for my expenses, so I didn't need the money. I decided that in the morning I would stop again and give him something more, this time out of generosity and not just out of convenience. I had seen him there each morning, so I figured he would be there the next day. The next morning, as I approached the area, I did not see the man or any of the people that had been there each day as I walked by. I looked around, and he was nowhere to be found. He had been there each morning and evening, and now he was gone. As I stood for a moment looking for him, I had this feeling that I had encountered Christ that day in this man, and that he was put there for a purpose. And that voice telling me to turn around was the Holy Spirit speaking to me. I looked for the man again that evening, and I did not find him, and I did not see him again. I believe that he was one of God's angels who was put there for me to experience Christ that day. Even though I was the one who gave of what I had, I felt blessed many times in return. It can be easy to become distracted by our busy lives, particularly these days, and to not find the time to share our gifts with others. It is important that we keep our focus on Christ and to see the needs of others. For it is where we spend our time and our energy that we will find our treasure. I experienced Christ in the encounter with the man on the street. As I reflect on this experience, it was an opportunity for me to share my gifts and to be Christ to someone else. As stewards of Christ, we are called to serve one another and to give freely of the gifts that God has given us. In closing, I pray that we will always be open to using the gifts that God has given us and to see the opportunities to be Christ to others. As we read in Matthew chapter 6, "For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." God bless.